that. So anybody want to say a little bit about Vivian McPeak and his role in all of this, since he's not here to speak for himself?
Yeah, I think Vivian has an important role, one of which, and I think, he's said this many times, he is not the doer of everything, and it is the hundreds of volunteers who do all of the incredible work here. He has been kind of the face, and my personal memories are actually of spending time with him in his house, talking about how we could change the world and all the hopes and dreams, and I think, we always should acknowledge his place, but also the place of the thousands of volunteers who came from here. And really, I think Hempfest gave us a place to have a lot of young people start in their activism. I wouldn't be here on stage if it wasn't for Hempfest letting me volunteer and telling me that telling the cops to go fuck themselves was not the most helpful moment in Hempfest history, right? And so that I think there's where Vivian's legacy will be, is helping folks find who they are and find their hopes and dreams. And that's something that I try to do for young folks who volunteer at the Exchange today.
I don't know the man personally, but he sounds like a peach.
Vivian is a peach. Actually, he's a smooth one now, for those of you who knew him or know him, beardless, which is the first time I've ever seen him. I say he looks like a young Abraham Lincoln. So, I first met Vivian so long ago, it's just a foggy memory, but over the years, of course Hempfest, but actually playing a role while I was in office to move forward the acceptance of legalizing marijuana, various steps, and then worked very closely actually in keeping this park open, because there was 1 year, maybe it was 2 years, where the Parks Department came to my office and said, Hempfest has really outgrown this park. We're thinking about moving you to Magnuson, big area, you can go over there. And of course, Hempfest did not want to move. And so then they said, well, it's freedom of speech. And then Parks Department said, well, we can get around that. And so it was an interesting discussion period. But strangely enough, in this balance, the additional weight on the Hempfest side ended up coming from the police, because they said it's no bother for the most part, and which is true. They make more arrests in one evening after a football game than they ever do here. So the point is that Vivian's been around for a while, and he's really kept this place going. Not alone, but he's been a critical player.
All right, so we just have a couple minutes.
And so I think it's always important to attract people who wouldn't necessarily be politically active, and then engaging them into the political system.
And it's one of the nice things about Hempfest, I find, is that you see people bring their families here and so forth. And being 25 years old, that means that now somebody who was born after the first Hempfest could actually have a kid and come here, so they could have 3 generations or more all at the same Hempfest. And the idea that it's a multi-generational thing is quite interesting, but it also is a bit of a challenge. We didn't have cell phones at the first Hempfest, for example. And so
we had the Bong Olympics at the first Hempfest.
And so as things have changed, it's like, how do we maintain the relevance to the next generation that now that like my generation group, we were kind of used to the idea of decrim. Now there's another generation that's going to be used to the idea of legalization, but we still want to keep moving forward. How do we keep that fresh to each generation moving forward from here?
We have to say to ourselves, is the legalization of marijuana, is that initiative satisfactory to the state? If it is, then I think we have to fight to keep it exactly the same. If it's not, then I think we have to use our political system to change that. What is wrong with it? How do we change it, and how do we motivate people to make those changes? And I think to notice what was missing in those laws. And as we go forward with many marijuana laws going forward, we're going to be able to compare states. So we're going to be able to see what maybe we did right or what we did wrong, and then make those changes. And I think, as you said earlier, looking at nationally, looking at how things play out. I mean, we were one of the first states, so we took a gamble and we did it this particular way. That doesn't necessarily make it the right way, it was just the way that we got it passed. So now I think we have to really critically look at it and see what was working, what was not working, what was made access to people, what do we really do with those tax dollars. You know, all of that stuff needs to be long-term looked at.
You know, as Hempfest has matured over 25 years, and having been at some of the first ones, the Hempfest people have grown up together. So, I mean, you have somewhat of an extended tribe here in some ways. And so when you talk about next generation, unless it's your own kids, which there may be, the other folks, there's not a natural bridge there, you know, for that experience, unless it's just get high maybe, and that may not be necessary. So, yeah, I guess what I'm saying is there has to be some conscious things going on at Hempfest to think about how to bring in that next generation.
I also think, you know, young folks growing up now that maybe like be 10 years old now, when they get to their teens and 20s, the thing that makes me happy is they're not going to see their friends incarcerated,
sure,
brutalized. But I also don't think we can ever forget that that's where we came from, right? That like the stress of and the fear of even smoking a joint in the back alleys of the U District. I mean, one of the things that always gave me hope is the day after the law passed, I saw 3 homeless people smoking a bowl at a bus stop, and as it passed, they looked at me and says, "It's legal now. We don't have to worry," right? And in some ways, I was like, yes, but how many people had to die for us to get here? And 2, you still have to worry because there's a many number of things they can do to make it more difficult for you and to target you specifically because of the race of your skin, your economic background, your sex, and I think we will always have a long fight.
And so, looking forward now, I know like with Oktoberfest has been around for a long time, and you go there and there's the beer steins and the tuba player and the accordions, and you know that's going to be around for a while. So, is Hempfest going to fall into that category where you know they look and say, oh look, they're still playing electric guitars over there at the Hempfest, and they're still rapping, and just like the good old days, or where do you see the things going from here for Hempfest? Is it going to become established like I was saying Oktoberfest, where it's just there forever, or do you think this is something that is going to have a phase and it's going to phase away?
Well, do you think in that direction it'll go as far as, let's say, the Comcast Hempfest? I got here in 1970 when, and in those days, just buying a roll, you know, that time I think it was $10 roll, was considered obviously a major felony. So, and prior to coming here the year before, I had 2 of my best friends arrested for literally having 1 joint, and they spent a year in jail. They were sentenced to longer, but they only spent a year in jail for 1 joint, between 2. So, so my earliest memories are how oppressive it created the general environment. People always watching you, had to be, you know, build up suspicions. And then as basically things began to change gradually, there was more openness. And I think that in Seattle, the reason Hempfest happened here is because I think we have a culture of openness. And I know people would say, well, gee, that's because Seattle's liberal, they're up there. But I have a theory that Seattle is as liberal, and I use that term as being more open, than other cities, or most other cities. It's not because the people here are any different than a lot of other people in other cities. I don't think we're different per se. We're getting 10,000 people new a year anyhow. Those people may be different. So, no, it hasn't to do with that. It has to do with us consciously trying to create a social environment in this city that people felt they had some influence over. And so one of the ways that's manifested that most people have never really thought about is what I call how porous our local government is. We have over 40 commissions. We have commissions that other cities wouldn't even think of. You know, we've obviously disabled, immigrants, the gay community, and then the human rights But all of these offer opportunities for citizens to participate, to review legislation, to comment on it. Most of them do not exercise the authority they have. I've always encouraged them to do so. But I think that's what resulted in a lot of people recognizing that, one, they can be part of government and they can have some influence. But two, realizing that basically if something goes wrong somewhere, they're complaining, then somebody's going to listen to them. They'll impact it. And so they have I think it gives them the freedom of experimenting more because they feel they have an opportunity to defend it within government.
There's no way to affect a sea change just by sort of running around and demonstrating for a couple of days. I think that Seattle's always been kind of lucky that we've had people willing to sort of chip away through various committees or just community involvement. While you were talking about your friends getting busted, I was reminded that back then we in the music community we were fighting things like the teen dance ordinance, which there was an absolute war on live music, particularly all ages live music back then, and it seemed on one hand it seemed absolutely unwinnable because the man was just kind of in charge, but over really just that one decade, we not only moved the ball, we just shoved the ball into the next field. There's among these commissions, the councilman is talking about the Nightlife Commission is a very influential.
We created that one.
Yeah, I think you sat on that one for a while.
I think
we've got the city talking to not just the concert promoters, but the bar owners and I don't know. It's entirely different. Mark Sidran seemed like he was an unstoppable Darth Vader-like force back then, and we just I don't know. It wasn't any one dozen people. It was just hundreds of people chipping away at it.
Yeah.
Well, and the one thing that is also important for people to know, because of that dance ordinance, young people like me, we couldn't go to live music. So Hempfest and the Peace, it was the Peace Park stuff, and those were the handful of events that a young person like myself could actually attend. And so attending that, then getting involved and volunteering and doing activism and understanding the laws and what police can and can't do, me educating my friends around me, created this change. And so I think we created this kind of progressive system by some of the fairly discriminatory policies we had in our city, and we became the reaction to that.
Right. I just want to, if I may, I think, as you pointed out, 25 years is phenomenal, continuing Hempfest going, but also it took close to 4 decades actually to legalize marijuana in Washington State. Which is interesting, my initiative was the same year that we also recognized marriage between same sexes. So that's a breakthrough year. I think it was 2012. But anyhow, I think that whole time frame and the whole energy at Hempfest could be described as what they refer to as a movement. Okay, there was a movement of people in the same direction, sharing a lot of energy, sharing similar ideas. First of all, it was defensive. Don't arrest. Then it was tolerate. Then it was legalize. But always moving the ball forward, always making progress. I think right now that we'll call it the cannabis movement is at a critical stage. The hardest time for any movement is actually after they have a victory, because often what happens, people will say, "Aha, we've done it," and the environment continues to change. No victory is ever secure in the social political arena. You have to continue to watchdog it and protect your rights and expand it where necessary, because technology will do that if you don't.
So is that kind of a message to the Bernie Sanders people that we saw that there was a lot of people I knew who were out for Bernie, but then they become actually hostile towards Bernie himself when he said that it's time to move forward like this, and so when we see these situations come up where people feel frustrated, I understand it, but everybody here is talking about this will take a long time to achieve this, and yet the Democratic platform now includes a pathway towards legalization. You got Hillary Clinton talking about moving marijuana out of Schedule 2. So we see this influence of Bernie Sanders, but a lot of his people seem to be saying, well, they didn't get everything they want, so therefore they're willing to drop out. How do you address that? What do you say to those guys?
What do you want to go first?
Well,
do you want
I
to say
think,
something?
you know, if you back up and do a little of the syringe exchange, right? So when the needle exchange started, we were in the middle of an HIV epidemic. People were dying, people were scared, right? We did 25 years of work, and the harsh reality is many people had to die, and did die, to get us to a place where we have about 2% rate of infection, incredibly low. And the response from the system was, we won the war on HIV, it's time to shut down syringe exchange programs because they were too successful. And so I think you can never be complacent. You know, Hempfest is here's a great point. Marijuana is legal, so why should we care about marijuana users? Well, it's not really legal if a homeless person is being targeted and harassed for smoking marijuana, and it's not really legal if it's only being concentrated in a handful of wealthy people and a wealthy system. There's still plenty of work to fight. And the reason, to be perfectly honest, I voted for that law is because I wanted to see a dramatic change, but knowing that I had to then spend the next 10, 20, 25 years to make sure that we can actually get successful systems in place.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure how it was a pretty big question that you had asked, and I'm not sure how it relates directly to Bernie himself, who I'm not sure whether he inhaled. I'll bet he did. But I will say that we're here on a beautiful day, enjoying a completely officially sanctioned giant gathering, during which at a half dozen other places in the city there are giant, also sanctioned music and arts things happening, and we, like Councilman Licata was saying, it's easy to feel like, yeah, we won and it's over and we win, but I guess it's still an opportunity that, since we're all together, to I don't know, seek out opportunities for activism and places the what's next.
Right.
And what is next?
Well, you know, I have to say at this point, really, we're talking about what I wrote about, becoming a citizen activist, because you don't have to be a superhero and you don't have to dedicate your life to activism, but you probably should be aware of what's going on around you and how you're being impacted. And I think, you know, the cannabis community obviously was aware that their friends are being arrested and how it grew, you know, and the awareness grew, the movement grew. But to address your statement about how do you deal with people, whether the Sanders people and his other movements as well, who on the paper, they got a victory, okay? But emotionally, it was a defeat because their dream was much higher, or their goal was much higher. And when I talk about, when I lecture, you know, or talk to people, is that if you don't learn, this is a cultural thing, if you don't learn how to celebrate your victories, you're doomed, okay? Basically, when you have a victory, you celebrate it. When you have a loss, you can mourn for a while, but the point is, you gotta move on. And if you only get, let's say, half a glass of milk, or whatever you wanna say, gin, you know, rather than the full glass, you celebrate the half a glass, and then you move on, because you realize the reward, when you think about it, is not in the end, it's in the process. The reward is that you are engaged. You will have many victories and many defeats, but you have to, if you want to be alive, you have to be engaged.
Plus, as an actual working politician for a long time, Councilman, it's worth noting that in real world politics, half a glass of milk is a bunch of milk. If a full glass is all you're, you know, it's a sort of compromise oriented, and you know, we haven't always seen eye to eye on stuff, but we've seen eye to eye on a bunch of stuff. So good to see you.
Well,
I won't be throwing anything at you later.
No.
And so I think nationally, because I like to see about, you know, transferring some of what's worked here in Seattle to the rest of the country and so forth, is that we've got these situations where, like, and I don't know, we have a lot of the local marijuana businesses actually sponsoring Hempfest, right? I don't know about the stores that actually sell the marijuana, the recreational stores, but I know that for a long time the whole issue has been that the social justice movement funds an initiative or gets a law passed, then businesses come in behind, they entrench, but then they don't necessarily put money back into the social justice side of it. And then we have situations like in Ohio where they put their money in and they decide to make it into something that's really benefits a small group of people who funded it. It was like an investment and so forth. So then when it comes back, when California looks at that, our law says that it keeps out monopolies and it really helps the small businesses. And we saw what happened up here with the disastrous effects on the medical marijuana system. So in California we say, we're going to really protect that. But then people come back and say, well, look at Ohio, look at Seattle, you know, these things happen. And it's like, how do you convince people that you can actually, number one, get the businesses involved in a way that's not just going to be for their sole interest, if you can. And the other thing is to make people understand that we can actually learn from what's going on in these other states and build on it, that we're not constantly repeating the same mistakes. Because people seem to like fall back and though there's still point to be about Ohio when we talk about California, and our law completely prevents monopolies, whereas their law was an oligarchy, but like a monopoly. So in terms of getting people's psyche is what I'm talking about, and so people understand that that you know, businesses, if they're going to be involved, they're going to have something for their own interest, but it can still help other people. But at the same time, that we can, just because somebody made a mistake someplace doesn't mean that same thing is going to happen everywhere else.
Well, you know, that's interesting about the businesses, because given the economic system we have, the businesses, for the most part, you're either shrinking or expanding. You know, it's very difficult to remain flat. So, and if you're expanding, you know, you are basically either owing your investors something or you have some incentive to keep in business, right? And so that's a reality. You know, that's not based on greed or anything. That's basically a reality of how you do business. Now the problem is that if your startup businesses, they feel they're so tight, they may feel, oh, I can't make a commitment or you know, contribution to the social justice. But there's other ways they could participate, even instead of a direct dollar. What's most important is that they recognize that there has to be a connection, and then they work on that connection. So in other words, you don't make it so the businesses feel like it's you just don't show up and say, hey, I want X number of dollars, and then go away. You want to establish a relationship. You want to establish a partnership. You have to figure out, will they, for instance, allow literature in their store? Will they, for instance, if they're doing advertising, you know, say this is an approved group by the Cannabis Association, something to give them a hook.
I also think, you know, when talking about businesses, one, many businesses, the exchange wouldn't actually have existed in the first place if it wasn't for businesses. Most of our supply closets were businesses like Five Doors Up, Espresso Aroma, Legro Cafe, all kind of supporters from the get-go. But even like modernly talking about consumption rooms, it's connecting to the businesses, and the businesses saying, we don't want people injecting in front of our business and behind our alleys, and we'll support a consumption room if that puts them into a safer place. So we become the solution for the businesses. And I think that's always important to kind of connect how your community, your solution has to be partly backed by your community, and showing people how your solution is in the best interest of everyone else.
Possibly it needs to stay customer driven as well. I mean, a business can only will stay closer to a perceived duty towards activism if the customers are there every day saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" You know, and I'll confess it's not something I know a ton about in the case of the new Washington companies. But I would hope that if there's some sort of social justice component to the new laws, the new-ish laws, the people calling them on it need to be the people in there buying the product, right?
And I do. Okay. My name is Shiloh Murphy, and 25 years ago, I actually was volunteering at Hempfest and getting together and organizing, and you know, that kind of slowly kind of changed my life into doing organizing. I also did the Syringe Access program, which has turned 25 technically last year. And that is started by Bob Quinn, who was an illegal Canadian, and he did something that no one thought was possible. And he just showed up and started handing out syringes 25 years ago. And I think we've had syringe exchange for 25 years now, and this city's talking about safe injection facilities. And I think it's important to talk about 25 years ago, the idea that someone could just walk up onto a street and start passing out syringes. That was fairly radical, and people were being arrested throughout this country doing that. And so I think going forward, it's easy to talk about, pushing the boundaries, but that was really radical stuff in those days. And he, in the early days, he literally got syringes from just anyone he could find them from. Public health started giving him donations and syringes, and the police, 4 years after he started, they told him they didn't know that he was doing it illegally, and they assumed that he had gotten permission, because who would be crazy enough to show up on the street of the University District and start handing out syringes? So I think that's something that's really important to understand, the history of where we are today. And Hempfest and The Stranger, it was a different time in Seattle, that 89, 90, 91, there was a lot of hope, and there was a lot of people talking about change, and some battles we won, like syringe exchange. Other battles we're still fighting. So I'll kind of leave most of my stuff for questions, so everyone can have a chance to speak to.
Actually, can I just put in one point to that, though, is that we've been working hard to change the image of the marijuana consumer and so forth to get more social acceptance. Now, what you're talking about is a whole other level of trying to get that kind of acceptance out there.
Yeah, for the most of our history, we have served entirely injection drug users, right? And I think there's a lot of myths out there, one of which we have about 20% of the people we serve in the U District are students of the university. We serve a huge portion of vets. We serve a whole bunch of kind of what you call working drug users, and a lot of warriors of people who use drugs once in a while. And then there's a lot of chronic addicts, who we serve. And I think for us in the anti-stigma movement is people tell them to stop, people tell them they're bad people. That has never been helpful. It's very difficult to get access to treatment. Last year, King County actually shut down their detox facility for a small period of time before they were able to get another one opened. And there's not a lot of treatments, and the most systems are set up in these 12-step systems that are great support systems but very poor treatments. And so we don't have a lot of options for folks. And if you're a vet, Veterans Affairs can drag their feet to get you treatment for sometimes years. And so I think giving love and compassion to people who use drugs is always going to be the best scenario. And if you believe that you are not loved and you're not cared for and you're worthless, you're going to make different decisions than if you believe in yourself and you are willing to follow your heart and follow your dreams and believe that you're somebody. And I think so it's very important interactions with drug users is to help them understand that they are somebody, because we spend billions of dollars to convince them otherwise. And you might be the difference in just telling someone that you love them.